Okay, the border deal, and the president says he's going to sign it and at the same time issue a national emergency to get more money for the wall.
Okay, so what's going to happen after that? We've told you that the Democrats are going to drag him into court. Surely that will happen. But first, after the president declares it's a national emergency, or, the humanitarian problem at our southern border, the flow of drugs, then immediately after he does that, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler is going to introduce into the House a resolution of disapproval that would overturn the president's emergency declaration. That's the way the law is written. Then, if it passes, and it will pass the House by a simple majority, then it goes to the Senate. If they get 51 votes in the Senate, then essentially the president would be out of luck. He would then have to veto it, which would be the first veto of his administration. But if he cannot get 51 in the Senate, that makes him look bad because that means Republicans voted against him.
Mitch McConnell's firmly for it. He said it yesterday in the afternoon, and why wouldn't he? A Washington Post reports that Mitch McConnell got a call from the White House saying, the more I'm reading this bill, I don't want to sign it. Mitch McConnell was beginning to panic and says, what do you mean you're not going to sign it? He says, you got to sign it. We got to fund the government. He said, this is a terrible bill. It's full of poison pills. So he said, as long as I can, he goes, I want to make sure that I can declare a state of emergencies because I got, and we've been working on for the past 3 months, ways to get additional funding to the tune of $8 billion. Yeah. So if I could do that and you're going to back that, I'll sign this. Mitch McConnell said, fine, I'll do it. He said, we'll vote on it. They voted first. They got 83 votes. More than enough. The House would vote later, get more than enough. But then Mitch McConnell would also say the president plans on declaring a state of emergency.
Legislation falls short of that $5.7 billion that he wanted for the wall. So he's saying, I'm going to find other ways to get that money. You're giving me basically 1.4 through this deal, 1.4 billion. I'm also going to get $600 million from the Treasury Department, the Drug Forfeiture Fund, $2.5 billion from the Defense Department for the Drug Interdiction Program, and $3.5 billion from the Defense Department Military Construction budget, all to be used to build that wall.
There you go.
Keep drugs out of the country.
You know what? I'm sure a lot of the president's base this morning is going, good. That's exactly why we put you there. We wanted you to do that. You know who doesn't like it? The Democrats.
Declaring a national emergency would be a lawless act.
If it was an emergency every time a president of the United States couldn't get what they wanted from Congress, we would be in a constant state of emergency.
We fought the Revolutionary War not to have King George or a successor. And this is the actions of a king. And no matter which route he takes, it'll be challenged in the court.
If the president can declare an emergency on something that he has created as an emergency, an illusion that he wants to convey, just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people.
It's been on the books since 1976. 58 times presidents with different values have been in the White House. And 58 times, in fact, 31 of the emergency actions are still on the books since 1976. So how bad can they be? And we know we've had a diversity of opinions and people in the White House. President Obama did it dozens of times. President Trump did about a dozen times. President Trump has already had 3 executive orders on declaring a state of emergency.
All right. Well, you heard from some of the Democrats who are not for it, but there are some Republicans, a lot of Republicans that are for this. Listen to this.
I think he will go the national emergency route because he has to. We had these 3 weeks to see if we could find a compromise. My hope was that we could give the president his budget number and do something about TPS and DACA, and that ship never appeared.
I don't join with my colleagues in believing that if the president does this, when he does it, he's declared he's going to do it, that it will be the end of Western order. I don't believe that.
So really it comes down to this. Do you think what is going on our southern border is a national emergency? When you look at the number of people who were apprehended in 2018, it was close to 400,000 that were apprehended. How many weren't apprehended? That's over, on average, that's over 1,100 per day. So if you think that there's a national emergency with so many people flowing across our southern border, whether it's the sex trafficking, which the president has talked about, or the drugs, you are firmly behind the president in doing this. And then you've got to ask yourself, is that Pentagon money that was appropriated by Congress to do different things, like drug interdiction or military construction? These clearly would both be to interdict drugs and build something on our southern border. If you can make the argument that that all makes sense, you think what he's doing is absolutely
This is
okay.
one of the reasons people went to the polls to vote for him, for that wall. And if you ask Republicans, the ones who support him and support the wall, they say it's common sense. Don't we want to know who's coming into the country so that we can just keep tabs on who's coming in? It's not, they don't have a heart for the people that are in the southern countries below us that don't have as much as we do. We all know this country is amazing. But their argument is we need to know who's coming in to make sure we keep the drugs out. We have a major drug problem in our country. Kids are dying all the time because they're overdosing on this. And fentanyl, you always say, what, it takes like 3 little drops, then you're dead.
Three grains, the size of a grain of salt, could kill a person.
It's amazing.
All right, meanwhile, the world didn't come to an end when Bill Clinton did it 17 times or George Bush did it 13 times. So this is who can make the better case.
Right.
It's going to work its way through the court, and the fact that it's emergency, it'll go there quick.
And
so
the
it's
White
game
House says
on.
they expect this to be held up in courts, but they also expect to win on appeals.
Well, let's see. Generally the courts uphold that the President of the United States has broad authority to protect the country. You're going to hear from the President himself. He will be live in the Rose Garden, we believe, exactly 4 hours from now. You'll see it on Fox. Meanwhile, had Andy McCabe essentially not had his way, President would not be in the White House today because he is revealing in this new book and 60 Minutes interview that apparently some top DOJ officials and FBI officials were trying to recruit cabinet members, talked about recruiting cabinet members and the vice president to oust the President of the United States via the 25th Amendment. Listen to this.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia, our most formidable adversary on the world stage. And that was something that troubled me greatly. I was very concerned that I was able to put the Russia case on absolutely solid ground in an indelible fashion, that were I removed quickly or reassigned or fired, that the case could not be closed.
Really? So, meanwhile, Andy McCabe has got a little problem. He's bringing a lot of focus back on what he did and didn't do as deputy director and former acting director. Remember, after the IG report, they recommended a criminal referral for Andy McCabe. And you cannot say Andy McCabe is telling the truth and at the same time say, I back James Comey, because they contradict each other at important times during important timelines. No doubt about it. He was taking head counts in order to overthrow the president. The vice president was asked about that yesterday and said, no one ever came up to me and said, would I take over the job should Andy McCabe of the FBI do a palace coup? Yeah. But that's what Alan Dershowitz was saying and fearing.
Any Justice Department official who even mentioned the 25th Amendment in the context of President Trump has committed a grievous offense against the Constitution. The framers of the 25th Amendment had in mind something very specific, and trying to use the 25th Amendment to circumvent the impeachment provisions or to circumvent an election is a despicable act of unconstitutional power grabbing. I challenge any of my colleagues who are in the Get Trump at Any Cost camp to come on television and justify the use of the 25th Amendment other than for physical or psychiatric incapacity.
Basically just says that if the president resigned or if the president passed away while he was in office, then the vice president would take his spot. Knowing what we know about this vice president, I surely doubt he would ever go against and not be loyal to the current administration.
Here's the thing. The 25th Amendment is very clear about how you would get rid of the president. It does involve the vice president. It involves the cabinet. It does not involve the Department of Justice and the FBI, and that is what they were trying to do.
The Deputy Attorney General, were you going? Was you going to wear a wire, or were you kidding? Who kids or sarcastically says, "I'm going to go in and meet with the president, wear a wire, and try to overthrow the government"? He said, "I was just kidding about that." Well, I have news for you. Andy McCabe, whoever was that source in the New York Times, says you weren't kidding. So we got to get Rosenstein, I believe, under oath in public to tell us who's lying, you, Andy McCabe, or James Comey.
Congress has been trying to get him up on the Hill for the last 6 months, and he's essentially said, I'll have informal meetings. I don't want to be under oath. Now Lindsey Graham wants to subpoena him unless he shows up and testifies.
He has to know.
McCabe said he was not joking. There were multiple occasions where he discussed wearing a wire when he talked to
How does he still have that job? How does he go to work every day knowing he was trying to overthrow the president?
This appearance by Mr. McCabe on this little clip for 60 Minutes, A lot of people are going to be watching. People are going to be reading the book to figure out what the heck else happened behind the scenes. Oops.
All right, 10 minutes after the hour, Jillian Mealy won't tell us what goes on behind the scenes at your show, but you will tell us what's going on in the news.
I will tell you what's going on in the news, and this is a big talker. Amazon pulling the plug on plans to build a New York City headquarters. Democrat Governor Andrew Cuomo now slamming his own party over this move. He claims it will cost $30 billion in revenue and 25,000 jobs, adding, quote, a small group of politicians put their own narrow political interests above their community. Democratic Socialist Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez praising New Yorkers for defeating, quote, Amazon's corporate greed. This is not the last you're going to hear of that. William Barr is officially confirmed as the U.S. Attorney General. Barr sworn in by Chief Justice John Roberts at the Oval Office with his wife and Senator Lindsey Graham by his side. His 3 daughters and grandchildren also at the ceremony, hours after the Senate confirmed him in a 54-45 vote. Barr previously served as AG under President George H.W. Bush. Today, a federal judge will hear arguments about adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census. The Trump administration says asking, are you a citizen, is crucial to calculating the population. But lawsuits from California and several cities argue that question could discourage immigrants and Latinos from participating in the census. The administration will appeal to the Supreme Court if the question gets denied. Hundreds of people attend a funeral for a World War II veteran with no surviving family. Look at this, the community in Massachusetts honoring 97-year-old James McHugh.
Once I found out that gentleman was part of the landing at Normandy, I had to be here. The sacrifices that that generation made and the cause that they fought for, they all deserve our respect.
McHugh enlisted in the Army in 1943 and served in 5 major battles in World War II. Isn't that incredible?
That's great.
Whole town showed up.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
That's
beautiful.
terrific. All right. Thanks,
Jillian.
Jillian. All right, coming up on this Friday, a legal fight will probably loom over the president's emergency declaration at 10 a.m. this morning. So is the law on his side? Law expert Jonathan Turley joins Brian next.
Plus, Kanye making all of us men look bad when he hires Kenny G for the ultimate Valentine's Day surprise.
Awesome.
Oh, my goodness. President Trump poised to declare a national emergency to build his wall and get other additional border security. And the move is expected to draw legal challenges. But how would this compare to national emergencies declared by former presidents? And is the law on the president's side or not? Let's ask constitutional law professor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, they're going to use your case against President Obama for what?
Well, that's right. And they're using the case where I represented the House of Representatives against Obamacare, and we won. But this is not the same case. What President Obama did was order the Treasury essentially to be opened up and to pay insurance companies. That's a different type of funding. What Trump is going to do is he's going to use money that was appropriated by Congress. It just doesn't have these tight conditions on them. That's Congress's decision to make. They can appropriate money and not put many conditions on. So it's going to be a different fight. So there's 2 issues here for the court. The authority, the source of the authority to declare the emergency, and the source of the funds. On the source of authority, they will lose in a spectacular fashion because they gave this authority to the president.
In 1976.
He and other presidents, that's right. He and other presidents have virtually unfettered authority to declare an emergency. On the funds, this is not our case from the Obamacare fight. They will have a much more difficult time in challenging all of these funds. And remember, the president could start construction with the money Congress just gave him. And even if they knock out 1 or 2 of these sources, he still has plenty to go pretty far down that road.
Bring me through the legal road. Who files the suit? I found it curious that the speaker yesterday wouldn't say, if he declares a national emergency, I'm going to look to stop it legally. She said, I didn't commit to that. If you want to stop the president, how do you file it?
Well, I have to tell you, I hope the House of Representatives is not foolish enough to file as an entire House the way they did when I represented them, because they could lose that important victory that we secured not that long ago. they don't have to do that. They can go down to the Texas border, find some ranchers that'll be subject to seizure of their land.
Right.
Those people have standing. They can sue. It'll go probably to the D.C. District Court. It could happen in some other jurisdictions. And the court will have to decide if it's going to enjoin this construction. I don't think it will, because they have a green light to start construction. Now, the court might enjoin some sources of funding, but that's not going to change much. That building is going to start along that line.
So
now, if the court
with the 1.3, it'll start building. Can the president begin to spend his 8 that he found in different departments while this makes its way through the court?
He can, until the court enjoins him. But the important thing is if Congress goes in front of the court and says, we want you to stop this, the court's going to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. You, first of all, gave this authority to the president without many conditions. You gave this money without many limitations. But more importantly, when you passed this act, you gave yourself the right to rescind it, to reject it. And so you're coming to me to do something that you could do, but you don't have the votes. And that's not normally what we do here in the judiciary branch.
Fascinating. So the president's going to sign his bill, then declare a state of emergency all before noon. Exciting day. 58 times the national state of emergency has been declared by the president since 1976. 31 of those emergencies are still on the books. Jonathan Turley, fascinating time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
As the president gets ready to declare a national emergency to build the wall, Beto O'Rourke wants to tear down existing walls. Isn't that great? We'll discuss that and so much more.
Here's some quick headlines for you. 2 new states are considering tougher abortion laws. Ohio and Mississippi proposing bills that would make the procedure illegal once a heartbeat is detected. Mississippi lawmakers say that there would be no exception for sexual assault victims or incest. If passed, both governors say that they will sign the measures. Former Ohio Governor John Kasich vetoed the bill last year. And Kentucky's Senate advancing a bill to allow residents to carry concealed weapons without a permit. Currently, permit seekers are required to pay a fee and complete a gun safety course. The bill now heads to Kentucky's State House. Steve?
Let's see what happens. All right, Ainsley, thank you. Democrats are gearing up for 2020, pushing further to the left with some socialist policies. But according to a brand new Fox News poll out this week, the majority of Americans prefer capitalism instead. Take a look at the big wall right over there. Nearly 60% of voters, 57% to be exact, say they have a positive view of capitalism. More than twice the number who feel the same about socialism. So what do younger generations not understand about capitalism, or why do they like socialism? Let's have a conversation. Here in the studio, we've got Peter Lumaj, an attorney who fled communist Albania to the United States, and Jason Nichols, lecturer of African American Studies at the University of Maryland. Good morning to both of you guys.
Good morning.
Good morning, Steve. All right, Jason, let's start with you. What is it about socialism that you think has captured the imagination of a lot of young people?
Well, first of all, I think we have to start out and understand that socialism and capitalism can coexist. This idea that there has to be this clear dichotomy between the two is kind of a false dichotomy. I believe that socialism, people seem to hate socialism like you had in your poll until you tell them that you're going to get rid of their Medicare or their Social Security, which are socialist programs. So I think, the idea that we can't have an expansion of the welfare state and also have some elements of private ownership, I think is a false dichotomy.
All right. Peter, your family fled Albania. Your father tortured to death by a socialist regime. I got a feeling you don't feel the same way.
Actually, I don't, but I'm surprised that the number that we got, Americans approving capitalism, I think it could have been worse if you take into account what the media is doing with socialism, promoting every single day, beating up capitalism, what the liberals are doing, what the academia is doing with capitalism. I'm surprised we got that number. If people knew how evil socialism is, the approval of capitalism should be about 90%.
What do you mean evil, Peter?
It is complete evil. It replaces God with government. It is against prosperity. It is against liberty. It is conformity. And if you don't conform with socialism, brutal force is going to be used against anyone who disagrees with it. I have seen that movie, and I don't like the ending of it.
Right.
My family suffered and endured under socialism, and the story that I'm sharing with you can be shared by millions of Americans, legal immigrants who came to the United States.
All right. Jason, at the University of Maryland, where you're a lecturer, are you one of the people who tries to show your class the benefits of socialism and say, hey, this is something we should be working for?
Well, what I do tell them is about the roots of capitalism and how they can be exploitative. The roots of capitalism in this part of the world, in the Western Hemisphere, are the slave trade and slavery. So I feel terrible for the people who have gone through dictatorships and a misuse of socialism. And as I said, I don't think that we should have either capitalism or socialism in a vacuum. I think we need social democracy, which is an expansion of the welfare state.
Right, but
when we look at pure
Jason,
capitalism,
the way
it's
you
very exploitative.
Pardon me, Jason, but the way you explained it earlier, you said because there are social programs right now in the United States to give people who are either down on their luck or are retired and need Social Security and things like that. That is an example of socialism in our democracy, right? That's what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm saying, but I think we can also expand it further in terms of more protections for American workers. So, I'm a believer in Medicare for all. I believe every human being needs health care, and that's a human right. So I think we can expand it even further.
All right, Jason. Jason, thank you very much. Peter, I'll give you the final word on this.
Look, socialism is all about command and control. When you look at capitalism, capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any other system in the world. If you give capitalism the free markets and allow the free markets to determine the people's future, allow people to be free, allow individuality to prosper, prosperity and liberty, they go hand to hand. Socialism kills that. There is no prosperity or freedom or liberty under socialism.
All right, we're going to leave it there for right now. We report, you decide, folks. Peter Lumaj and Jason Nichols, thank you very much. Good discussion on this Friday.
Thank you for having us.
All right. What do you think about that? Email us, friends@foxnews.com. 6:30 now here in New York City. The man attacked by a mountain lion while hiking, speaking out for the very first time. Listen to this.
There was a point where I was concerned that I wasn't going to make it out of it. I knew with two pretty good blows to the back of the head that it didn't release, that I was probably going to have to do something a little more drastic.
And he did. The incredible survival story of that man coming up next. And forget building walls. Beto O'Rourke wants to tear down the walls that are there right now. Ned Ryan on deck with that and much more. You're watching Fox and Friends for a Friday.
What Granddaddy defended, this flag I'm waving said.
So let me be very clear. We really have no choice but to build a powerful wall or steel barrier. If we don't get a fair deal from Congress, the government will either shut down on February 15th again, or I will use the powers afforded to me under the laws and the Constitution of the United States to address this emergency.
Well, he wasn't kidding. That's what he's going to do today at 10 o'clock. He's going to go into the same Rose Garden, and he's going to sign the bill and declare a national emergency. Ned Ryan, Republican strategist. He was a speechwriter for George W. Bush and founder and CEO of American Majority. Do you like the way the president's doing this?
I think he is compelled to do something because Congress has chosen not to act. This bill is far more odious than people want to acknowledge.
It's very restrictive.
The wall funds are restricted to the Rio Grande sector, the 55 miles. Local government has the ability to essentially veto that. Well, guess who controls all the local government in that sector? Democrats. And I'm telling people, I think if it's any of those miles are actually built, it'll be years from now, because I think they're just going to be doing, resist and restrict and try and prevent that from being built. So I think he is compelled to go this route. I'm not crazy about the national emergency route. I've been arguing for the Department of Defense's Section 284 authorization. You don't have to declare a national emergency.
Just reprogram the money.
But you can take that money. They are allowed to build fencing, walls, roads in places that are known to be known drug smuggling corridors. And quite frankly, how you define those corridors is a very loose definition. If there have been one or two examples, you can declare it a corridor.
See, I was with you until if he didn't go through the legislative process, just
he's done
it. But he did everything possible, including shutting down the government for 34 days. And he sent in 8 people to negotiate in a bipartisan, bicameral way. And then he looks at this thing, has an hour to look at, 1,000 pages, starts seeing some of these restrictions, started pulling back. He wasn't even going to sign it yesterday at one point.
No, I think
what else do you want him to do?
No, I think Trump has been able to say, I've been reasonable. I was an honest broker. I reopened government so that we could have a negotiation. And you guys sent this back to me. This is not a serious proposal. I have to take the steps that I have been given as the executive to either declare that national emergency or again repurpose some of those funds to build this wall.
Let's talk about Texas, because the president wants to build the wall down there on the southern border. And you have a Republican Congressman, Dan Crenshaw, who is asking the question. He said, if I had a chance to sit down with Beto O'Rourke, I would want to ask him this question. He put this on Twitter. If you could snap your fingers and make El Paso's border wall disappear, would you?
Right.
Well, then Beto O'Rourke was in an interview with Chris Hayes, and Chris Hayes asked him a similar question. Listen to this.
It's hard to make a rational case for an emergency declaration or troops on the border or any amount of additional border walls or border fencing or steel slats. The border has never been as safe and secure as it is now.
You know, would you take the wall down now, here?
Yes.
Like you have a wall.
Absolutely.
You would absolutely support tearing down the wall.
Boy, I got to tell you, what I find refreshing these days is how honest the Democrats are being about their very radical views. They're dropping the pretense. I've been arguing the Democratic Party has been masquerading as a center-left party for years when, in fact, they truly are a socialist party. They want open borders. I find this refreshing. This is what they want. They want an open border approach. And for him to say that our borders have never been more secure, you guys just showed that graphic. 400,000 people a year just coming through our southern border. This is not the right approach a sovereign nation takes. We have to actually have borders.
But it just goes to show you how this is pure politics. He says the walls right now are forcing illegals toward the most dangerous places to cross. Wait a second. So you're saying the wall is forcing people to go a different direction, so shut off that direction.
Because
He just
physical
backed up the reason for a war.
I'm telling you this, they don't want the wall because they want people to keep flowing in because they think they're building out their political base. I have to tell you, I think Donald Trump has to make the argument for even more immigration reform, especially on the chain migration front.
So you're saying if they open the borders, come on in, we'll pay for everything for you, free college,
well, they're turning him into
free
wards of the
healthcare,
state. We talked about this one of the last times. 63% of the non-citizens that come in end up on a form of social welfare. If you've been in the country more than 10 years, it goes to 70%. They are creating wards of the state who want more government assistance, turns them into Democratic voters.
You know as well, there are a lot of businesses that count on the cheap labor, and that's the problem.
This is an unholy alliance that we've gotten to this point between Democrats and Republicans.
Get them work visas, we'll use their labor, they get their money, but we do it the right way.
All right.
That's right.
Fellow Jayhawk, Ned
That's right,
Bryant.
Rock Chalk.
Thank you very much. Go KU.
Thank you.
All right, 22 minutes before the top of the hour, and Jillian joins us right now.
Good morning to you. Good Friday. Let's get you caught up starting with this story. The Green Beret accused of murdering a suspected terrorist wants his charges dropped. Major Matthew Goldstein claims the lead investigator in the case is practicing stolen valor.
That he was wearing awards that he did not rate, that he was doing that for personal gain.
Goldstein's lawyer says an anonymous tip led them to investigate Army Sergeant Mark Delacruz. They say he did not earn several awards, including a Purple Heart. A runner is speaking out after he claims he fought off a mountain lion with his bare hands.
I was able to kind of shift my weight and get a foot on its neck. Another couple of minutes later, it finally stopped moving, and then jaws opened. There was a point where I was concerned that I wasn't going to make it out of it.
Travis Kaufman says he suffocated the animal after it attacked him at a Colorado park. He had to run 3 miles to get help. Good luck trying to keep up with this Kardashian. Kanye West pulling out all the stops to surprise his wife Kim for Valentine's Day. Yeah, in case you're wondering, that's famous jazz musician Kenny G serenading the reality star in her living room, surrounded by, look at all those roses. Kardashian calls the private performance one of the most thoughtful gifts she's ever received.
Yeah, I would think so. It's hard to find a runner-up to that.
Who
How much
does
does
that?
Kenny G demand?
Well, as it turns out, according to TMZ, he was not paid. And you know when Kanye came up with this idea?
Huh, when? Like 5 minutes before?
11 o'clock on the night before.
Really?
And he called Kenny G up and said, hey, what do you think about this Kenny G next thing?
I
And that
guess
was
they
right
moved
there.
all the furniture. Is that an engagement or is that Valentine's Day? I mean,
It's like way
everything he does is
See, my problem is I called at 12 o'clock. I didn't know he get called at 11.
Well, shame
so
on you,
I was
Brian.
at 11.
Right.
Well, Janice Dean, you're outside. You took off yesterday.
Yeah. I went to the CVS. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Good for Kanye bringing back the music of Kenny G of the 90s. It's incredible. A lot of folks didn't know Kenny G until now. Again, wonderful stuff. I'm wondering how Kenny G got out of there because it looked like it was a bit of a maze through flowers. Okay, let's take a look at the maps because it feels like springtime here in New York City. 45 right now, 41 in Buffalo. You can see where the cold air is. We have this frontal boundary, and along that frontal boundary, wintry weather is still in effect across the central U.S., across portions of the Great Lakes, and I'm worried about icing for the central U.S. across the Ohio Valley, where we could see some significant ice, not only today, but through Saturday. So Paducah, I'm worried about you across the Tennessee River Valley. That's where we could see accumulating ice and dangerous driving conditions. Future radar shows that active west and some of that energy coming across the central U.S., where we could see the potential for more heavy snow. And then next week, we'll be focusing on the flood threat over the southeast. All right. I'm sorry I didn't bring my oboe or whatever he plays back inside.
What your long receipt?
What is it again?
It's a soprano sax.
Oh, the soprano sax.
There you go.
Yes.
I'll see you inside.
All right, Janice Dean, thank you very much. Meanwhile, straight ahead on our Friday telecast.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar facing backlash from her anti-Semitic comments from even those of her own faith. Our next guest, a Muslim scholar, weighs in next.
Plus, Amazon just pulled thousands of jobs out of New York City, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could not be happier. Thanks.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar sparking bipartisan backlash for anti-Israel remarks. Omar tweeting, quote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," suggesting that lawmakers are bribed to support Israel. Our next guest is one of the many calling her out, writing in a new op-ed that Omar's actions are bringing shame to American Muslims. Here to explain is Dr. Quanta Ahmed, member of the Council of Foreign Relations and author of In the Land of Invisible Women. Thank you for being with us. Why do you say that in your op-ed?
She's proving to be an enormous liability to America's Muslims. In her remarks, she's branded every Muslim in America as an anti-Semite. And this is absolutely unacceptable and un-Islamic. She's shown a degree of insolence, arrogance, and casual familiarity with anti-Semitic expressions and beliefs for years, going back to tweets in 2012. The Jewish community in Minnesota approached her to try and see where these ideas were coming from and help her understand. And it's a disgrace. And to single out AIPAC, by the way, I'm not paid by AIPAC. I have no relationship with them. She fails to mention that Muslim nations, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, spend orders of magnitude, tens of millions of dollars more on lobbying than AIPAC does. So there's an incredible bias that's disturbing and to me speaks of Islamist anti-Semitism.
Should she be penalized? Some are even calling for her to step down.
Eject her from the House of Foreign Affairs Committee immediately. The Democratic Party has no justification for keeping her there. Anything she's proposing is now going to be interpreted through the lens of anti-Semitism. We also are very concerned, I am, that she's affiliated with the boycott, divestment, sanction movement, which is legitimizing and normalizing anti-Semitism. It's a movement that calls for the eradication of the state of Israel, which is unacceptable. It's disguised as a human rights movement, but it's actually anti-Semitism. And that's the new anti-Semitism. It's infecting Islam. There's an op-ed in the Washington Post about it by a colleague. Anti-Semitism is carried now through Islam, whether Muslims like it or not, and that is antithetical to Islamic belief. But she embodies that, and America's Muslims must reject it.
So this was her apology. My intention is never to offend my constituents or Jewish Americans as a whole. At the same time, I